may be one choice away from a thriving marriage. Welcome to the Operation Thriving Marriage podcast with Brian and Jennifer Harvey.
So hey guys, welcome back to the Operation Thriving Marriage podcast. Brian and Jen here. We appreciate you guys listening. Last episode, we talked about how to sabotage communication in your marriage, part 1. So this is part 2 of how to sabotage communication in your marriage.
Right. So this is something about how to trash your marriage. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram for more how to sabotage your marriage. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're telling you about how communication can be sabotaged to make sure that we're not doing that. And we don't want you to do that either, right?
So one of these days I want to do an episode kind of along the lines of, or maybe write a book or something, kind of along the lines of C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters.
Oh boy!
Where like I want to write a book, or maybe just like
you got an idea,
a monograph, something about Satan's advice to married couples.
Oh boy!
So I don't know. I mean, let us know in the notes or on Instagram and Facebook and stuff if you think that's a good idea that we should write that book, because I think that would be an interesting thing to do.
Oh dear. And yeah, my ideas are flowing right now too. But of course we in that last episode, the part 1, we did talk about the first 2 ways that couples sabotage communication in their marriages, and that is harboring resentment and bottling up emotions. And if you haven't listened to that episode quite yet, we encourage you to go back and listen to it, because in this episode, we're discussing 3 other ways that couples can sabotage communication. And of course, I am thinking of that song, Sabotage by the Beastie Boys right now.
It's still in our head.
It's still in my head. And that's taken me to another song, which is Zombie by the Cranberries. But see, it's flowing, and that's how I am. But these last 3 ways...
See, I actually sing on the podcast. Jen won't.
Okay. Well, the 3 ways that we're going to talk about today that can sabotage communication is allowing arguments to grow, refusing to apologize, and also reacting without thinking. And, Brian, I'll have you kick us off for this.
So, yeah, we've talked a lot in the first episode in this series. Communication is key to a thriving marriage. Communication is one of the primary ways we learn, we become one flesh as God intends for us to be in our marriage. And one of the ways that we can prevent that communication is allowing arguments to grow. But to start out, I want to reiterate that arguments in marriage are not bad.
No.
Matter of fact, you should argue.
Yes.
And we want you to argue in healthy ways, but if you're not arguing, if you never argue in your marriage, one of 3 things is happening. 1, you're not communicating openly.
Sure.
You're just keeping things inside. You're not being open about your communication. One of you is avoiding sharing your thoughts or feelings. Like, you know what? I'm just not going to peace at all costs.
Right. I'm just not going to put it out there.
I don't want to. You're avoiding, so you're not giving all of yourself to your spouse, or one of you is preventing the other from sharing. You're shutting your spouse down, preventing communication. So arguing actually is healthy in marriage, and it's important because that's how you work through those rough edges that you have. That's part of how you grow in holiness, is working through those disagreements together and coming up with a solution to move forward together in your relationship.
And take it from a lawyer. When you argue, it's important that you keep your arguments focused on the issue at hand, because ways that arguments can grow. Oh, we did a podcast about this one, the keeping and showing receipts.
It's bad. It's bad.
It's very, very bad. But Brian, elaborate on that a little.
So this is one of those things where your spouse does something and you just make a mental note of it. Oh yeah, this and this and this. And then in an argument that you're talking about issue A, in the process of talking about issue A, let me point out all of the other things you've done to annoy me about this over the past 20 years of our marriage.
And that could be a list that could go around your house, 27 times or something like that, because some people will do that in keeping these receipts. Because again, when we say keeping receipts, we're not talking about finances in this kind of case.
No, this is just, hey, you're keeping track of inconveniences, irritations, your whatever it is, you're keeping track of those things, and then you're bringing them up at a later date, and that's not healthy for your marriage, and that's one of the ways that arguments will grow, which is going to sabotage communication in your marriage.
And another way that arguments can grow is the deflection. And I mean, I think we've seen some deflection with, kids doing stuff like that, but adults do it too, because it's like the deflecting of you're being confronted, hopefully in a positive way, but even if you're not, with something, and then you're going back with, oh yeah, well, you did this other thing. That doesn't have anything to do with the issue at hand, but you're just kind of deflecting the argument or the criticism or the uncomfortableness off of yourself. And I think that this is
let me
Oh,
jump
go
in
ahead,
on
Brian.
that as well, because another way thought about that. Another way of deflecting, though,
Yeah?
is if your spouse will bring up something and then you'll say, "Oh yeah, well, so and so at work doesn't bother them," or "This doesn't bother.
Oh,
This
dear.
shouldn't bother you because this is, when I'm here, when I do this, when I do that, it doesn't bother them." That's creating so much unhealth in your communication, and all you're doing is now, instead of arguing about this thing, you're creating another opportunity to argue about something else.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I know, just, in conversations that we've had about this can be very common. We get messages from you listeners, and we appreciate that. But we hear this a lot when we've heard about arguing about things that have to do with in-laws, whether it's, visiting in-laws or interactions with in-laws, just that kind of stuff. Another one is the one-upmanship. It's like, again, I know I did this thing, but, you did this worse thing, right?
It's kind of a subset of the keeping receipts, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, maybe I didn't put the dishes away like you wanted me to, but you broke this thing that was special to me when you were cleaning up, and that you knew that was important to me. Or, it's just, you take it's like, okay, now I'm going to just up the ante, trying to make your spouse feel bad about something they did so that they'll stop arguing about this thing. And now you're just arguing about 2, 3, 4, 8 things.
Right. And it's not in a courtroom, so you can't just say, judge, objection, one-upsmanship. I want a ruling on this. And again, for an argument with your spouse, obviously you don't want to have this arbiter over that and, be objecting and so on and so forth. But these are just things to kind of keep in mind with these kinds of arguments, so that you're not doing that, and you and your spouse are mutually agreeing to not put that into communication during an argument.
Something you told me, I think it was when you were in law school, maybe it was after you got out, but you talked to me about the kitchen sink argument, where lawyers will just they'll just stack up accusations and throw everything in the kitchen sink at this situation, hoping the judge will let something stick.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this is when you allow arguments to grow in your marriage. You're just throwing everything out there, hoping something will stick. And really your goal is, instead of communicating and building oneness in your marriage, your goal is winning.
Oh, the winning, or like you said, hoping something will stick, and you're looking to destroy the other side, even if at the end of the day it doesn't have merit and it's not helpful.
And if one of you loses,
you both lose. Oh, that's true. That's so true. So, some of the best ways to prevent arguments from growing, I mean, I'm thinking of this just as a visual aid, about like a balloon, that just keeps inflating and inflating and then it busts for the worst, is you set these ground rules about arguments when you're not arguing.
Never try to set new ground rules in the middle of an argument. That's not going to work.
No, that's not going to, nobody's going to roll with that well. But I think there's 3 kind of key points there. You want to discuss how you're handling these grievances without keeping the receipts that are going to go around your house 27 times. You got to drop these receipts, friends. A second thing is discussing safe ways to redirect tangents that you might go off on and get back to the point of the argument, which again is not about fighting. It's about resolving an issue mutually together for the good of yourselves and for your marriage. And of course, that number 3 is, don't be afraid to take a break when emotions get high. We've been involved in marriage mediation training, and they talk about the idea of unplugging. And that doesn't mean I'm disconnecting from my spouse in an unhealthy way. It's just saying, you know what, I'm getting really emotional and really upset here. I've got to take a little bit of time. And the only person that I'm talking to during that time is Jesus. And your spouse is going to be very comfortable with that, or should be, because you're not spilling spilling all of these grievances or airing the dirty laundry to friends and family members. You're just taking time to decompress and not be at such an emotionally heightened state, and then continue the conversation later on as agreed upon, as an agreed upon time frame between the two of you.
So let's look at this really quick, scientifically really quickly. The hormones that are produced when you're stressed and angry and stuff, you get into that fight, flight, or freeze that we've all heard about. That is conditioning your body to react to threats, and it's shutting down the part of your brain that thinks and processes information logically. Because in those situations, you don't have time to, oh, there's a tiger about to eat me. What's the logical conclusion? No, just get away from the tiger. Okay, that's what your body is trying to do. That's what that's what those hormones do. And so then when you are in this heightened emotional state in an argument, you're not able to think logically, use the higher functions of your brain. And so this taking a walk, this is taking a break, is allowing those chemicals, those hormones in your body to flush out of your system so that the higher functions of your brain can function. So this is one of the ground rules you set, is you have the safe word. You say, hey, okay, you know what? This is going to be the time I know that I can't think well right now because of all these emotions. So you have that as part of the ground rules to be able to take a break, allow that to flush through your system, drink some water. That's going to drink some water. That's going to help flush
Hydrate.
And then you're able to come back.
Absolutely. We've talked, more about kind of how to argue well in this, but another sabotaging point is withholding apologies.
Yep, that'll ruin communication real quick.
Oh, to say the least. That phrase, I'm sorry, is probably one of the most important phrases in a marriage. But
sorry, what was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. But it's important that it is sincere. And I will say, when you're dealing with any kind of litigation, what's worse than no apology is a bad apology. So sincerity is just so key. I know in some of these notes that you've made, Brian, you say, keep your big butts out of your apologies. Me thinking music, you know where I'm going for the I like big butts and I cannot lie. However, we don't like the big butts.
That was not
in
my
apologies.
Intent. I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought you were giving me a hard time on this.
When we were talking about apologies on an earlier podcast, Jen said that off the cuff as one of the things in the podcast. I'm sorry. I was not intending to bring that into the
Well, I accept your apology, haha. But what are some reasons that people would withhold apologies? So I think our number one, which is us being sinful people, that's just who we are and unfortunately can live into, is we want to refuse to admit fault.
Absolutely. That's one of the things. I mean, sinful humans work so hard at putting on a mask that, hey, I am this thing. I have this perfect this or that. And sorry, to be sincere, to be honest about an apology, you have to admit, hey, I was wrong. And that is one of the hardest things for us to do. But you have to be able to do that to have healthy communication in your marriage.
And a second reason I think that people withhold apologies is, and it irritates me to say this, but it's true, which is saying I'm sorry is somehow a sign of weakness. Yeah. I see it more as a sign of strength personally, but some people have been raised to say apologizing is a sign of weakness in whatever relationship that is.
And that ties into the next one. It's a desire for control.
Sure.
It's one of those.
You're right.
I want to control, so if I'm not saying sorry, I'm not admitting fault, then I have authority in this situation. And that's one of the reasons people withhold apologies. I want to control the outcome.
And a total lack of humility, right?
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In withholding apologies, it will create emotional distance in your marriage. I mean, I think it's just terrible to not apologize.
No one wants to be around a person long term that never admits their faults.
Right, and it does create that emotional distance there because it removes that safety in the relationship.
And frankly, it's a rejection of your spouse.
It is.
It's just rejecting them as a person. You're treating them as an object, as something less than, because you're not willing to treat them as an equal human being.
And just the idea of saying I'm sorry is a sign of weakness, I think that being able to admit fault is that huge sign of strength and knowing who you are and understanding and accepting that you're not perfect. And, again, you don't want to reject your spouse. I think that it's not about being right. It's about being close.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Few things will ruin communication and wreck your marriage like refusing to apologize.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to give like pro tips. We try to give like action steps to help you. There's really no pro tips. There's really no secrets about this. Just do it. Admit you're wrong and say you're sorry. That's vital to healthy communication in your relationship.
And the final point that we're talking about today that can sabotage your communication, sabotage your marriage ultimately, is reacting without thinking. Uh-oh.
And I'm bad at this, I think. I think I'm really I think I'm getting better at it. It's over the past probably 8 to 10 years or so. It's been brought to my attention about this. I'd like to blame it on having a penchant for action, developed from me serving in the military. I'd like to say that my service just wanting to be action oriented, but the truth is that's really just an excuse for bad behavior. There are times when I need to react, not think. That's true. That's not in my relationship with Jen. There are certain times and places where it's like we don't have time to think this out. We don't have to. We just have to react. We have to go. Not in our relationship. Not in our marriage. No, I need to not let that happen and be more disciplined.
Nobody's perfect in marriages, and I think it's cool that you're able to talk through some of these feelings that you're having about, hey, what do I do well, what do I not do well, and just like I'm supporting you for improving towards what you think you need to do as an improvement too. But I do think that it's not a big secret about just acting without thinking. It's like not the best trait to have. So if you find yourself doing or saying things without consciously choosing to do it, you're then reacting without thinking, and that could again cause disaster because it creates that unsafe environment in marriage. You don't want your spouse to be constantly on edge because they see you as being really volatile. That can just destroy intimacy right there.
It destroys intimacy. It's unhealthy and it's unnecessary. And there are two things that we recommend to help you with this one. One is discipline. You just have to discipline yourself. And like we've said many times, you're the only one that can fix you. Now here, prayer is huge in this though, because self-discipline is hard. We need the Holy Spirit working in us, empowering us to the discipline we need. So prayer is a huge piece of being open to God's work, the Holy Spirit working in us to be that person. So acknowledging, admitting that, and then allowing God to empower us. And then ask your spouse for help. Your spouse knows when you're reacting without thinking, when you don't. And that's part of the problem. You're not thinking. And so it's always, for me, it's always when I look back on a situation, it's like, oh man, I screwed that up. And so now I have to go and apologize to Jen. It's like, hey, sweetheart, yeah, I'm sorry. I did this. But the problem is sometimes it's so much later when that's happened that I've created a bad situation. We create a bad situation. So we need to rely on our spouses and give our spouses permission to lovingly call us out on it. It's like, hey, that thing you just did, that felt like you reacted without thinking. That's not how you would normally react if you'd given yourself just a moment to process it.
Communication is essential to a thriving marriage. We all sabotage communication in our marriages in many ways. 5 of the big ones are harboring resentment, bottling up emotions, allowing arguments to grow, withholding apologies, and reacting without thinking. What are some of the other sabotages to communication that you think we might have missed? Send us a message at OperationThrivingMarriage.com or share your thoughts on Facebook or Instagram with us. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast because that'll help us get out the word to others. God bless.
Jen and I started Operation Thriving Marriage to help couples and churches take marriages from merely surviving to thriving. We've got our book, we've got a blog, and resources for our coaching ministry, and you can bring us out for an Operation Thriving Marriage experience. For more information, go to OperationThrivingMarriage.com. That's OperationThrivingMarriage.com.